Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Aneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The Taliban say they have killed 17 security personnel during clashes in Afghanistan's BAGHLAN and JAWZJAN provinces. A Taliban spokesperson said they have seized GODARI area of the BAGHLAN and 3 checkpoints in JAWZJAN. The Taliban have also claimed to have captured Duab and MANDUL districts in the eastern NURISTAN province. According to the government officials, fighting still continues in 2 districts of the BAGHLAN province. Israeli forces have injured more than 130 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian Red Crescent said 23 Palestinians were injured after Israeli police fired tear gas and stun grenades at a protest marathon. Meanwhile, the toll of Palestinians injured after forces opened live fire at an anti-settlements rally in the Blue City has risen to 113. Britain, France, Germany and the United States will not push for a resolution against Iran at the UN Nuclear Watchdog's board meeting next week. The diplomat said there would not be a resolution but simply statements by the member countries. This comes as the UN watchdog released a report earlier this week on Tehran's failure to explain uranium traces found at 3 of its sites. China has approved a nebulized inhalable COVID-19 vaccine for expanded clinical trials. Meanwhile, in India, the virus has claimed nearly 3,400 lives and infected more than 120,000 people in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, 84 people have lost their lives to the virus and over 1,900 tested positive overnight. While globally, more than 3.7 million people have died from the coronavirus and over 172 million people have been infected so far. These were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Back now, let's have the news in detail. Start from Afghanistan, where the Taliban say they have killed 17 security personnel during clashes in Afghanistan's BAGHLAN and JAWZJAN provinces. A Taliban spokesperson said they have seized GODARI area in the BAGHLAN and 3 checkpoints in JAWZJAN. According to the government officials, fighting still continues in 2 districts of the BAGHLAN province. Local media said the provincial governor has confirmed the killings of police chiefs. The Taliban also claimed to have captured Duab and Mandul districts in the eastern Nuristan province. Meanwhile, Kabul said the security forces have killed over 80 Taliban during separate operations in Uruzgan, Zabul and Medan Vardak provinces. Now, the US has announced more than $266 million in humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the money will support 18 million Afghans. Blinken said the funding will be directed towards shelter, healthcare, food and pandemic response. The Secretary said Washington has sent nearly $3.9 billion in humanitarian aid to Kabul since 2002. He also thanked Afghanistan's neighbors for hosting refugees and urged them to keep their borders open. Blinken also reiterated Washington's call for Kabul and the Taliban to accelerate work for a negotiated political settlement and a ceasefire. Now, Israeli forces have injured more than 130 Palestinians in different cities of the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Red Crescent says 23 runners were injured after Israeli police fired tear gas and stun grenades at a protest marathon. It said the race was organized in solidarity with Palestinian families facing forced expulsions in occupied Jerusalem. The run began in Sheikh Jarrah and was 2 and 3.5 kilometers away in Silvan. There was no immediate comment from the Israeli military. Meanwhile, the number of Palestinians injured in the shooting at an anti-settlements rally in the Blue City has risen to 113. Earlier, Palestine's agricultural ministry said the losses in the recent Israeli military offensive on Gaza stand at $204 million. The United States, United Kingdom, France and Germany will not push for a resolution against Iran at a meeting of the UN nuclear watchdog next week. Diplomats say the countries will simply issue statements despite Tehran's failure to explain uranium traces found at 3 sites. A resolution may prompt an escalation between Tehran and the West and may jeopardize the Vienna talks. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister says he has agreed with his British counterpart on the need to resume compliance with the 2015 deal. Jawad Zarif says the US must stop using sanctions as negotiating leverage. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says India crossed a red line by revoking occupied Kashmir's autonomy. In an interview, Khan said the move is a violation of United Nations resolutions and international law. He said Pakistan is ready to start talks with India if it provides a roadmap to restore the valid special status. Khan lamented the fact that there has been no response from India on the issue so far. On Afghanistan, Khan said Islamabad is pushing for a political settlement before foreign troops leave. Khan warned both Pakistan and Afghanistan will suffer if there is a civil war that leads to a refugee crisis. Now, in India, COVID-19 has claimed nearly 3,400 lives and infected more than 120,000 people in the past 24 hours. Worldwide, there are more than 3.7 million deaths and 172 million cases. More about the pandemic in this report.
The global race involving coronavirus vaccines and the political controversies surrounding these jabs is only getting tighter every day. China's renowned vaccine developer Chen Wei says a nebulized inhalable vaccine has been approved for expanded clinical trials. Russian President Vladimir Putin claims Europe was slow to approve the Sputnik V vaccine because of a battle for money, and commercial interests were being put ahead of the welfare of European citizens. Argentina and Serbia have begun the industrial production of the Sputnik V jab. Currently, Argentina ranks 3rd highest in the world for average daily cases, with more cases recorded per capita than Brazil.
We are seeing a decrease on average in the age of the people who are dying of the COVID-19. But the majority of the people who are dying are older than 60 years of age. That decrease is thanks to the vaccinations. What we have to do now is to lower the number of the deaths and lower the number of the cases.
Mexico says it will give Johnson & Johnson vaccines supplied by the US to people aged 18 to 40 along the border region. In the US, experts say increasing adolescent hospitalizations are a reminder that even children are at risk. Britain's Health Secretary Matt Hancock says vaccinating children in the UK will take priority over donating doses to other countries. Meanwhile, UEFA and Britain are mulling lifting quarantine restrictions on overseas supporters for the knockout stages of Euro 2020 championships. Over in India, the World Food Programme says the Modi government's relief efforts are not enough.
So in that context, this challenge of job loss and loss in employment opportunities and loss in wages has a severe consequence on food and nutrition. So we worry about it very much. And of course, now these 2 months, this announcement by the government is a very positive support and initiative, but probably there will be a need to do these type of things for a longer period, and as well as there might be a need for additional support.
Meanwhile, in Japan, a senior Olympic official has criticized the International Olympic Committee for ignoring public concerns over holding the Tokyo Games during the pandemic.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 84 people have lost their lives to coronavirus over the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry logged more than 1,900 cases overnight. According to statistics, more than 21,000 people have died since the beginning of the pandemic. The number of confirmed cases has topped 930,000. Meanwhile, more than 860,000 people have recovered so far. Just over 3,400 people are in intensive care units. A total of 8.26 million vaccines have been administered in Pakistan. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says the US is trying to hold back the developments made by Moscow for the betterment of bilateral relationship. Speaking at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin said Russia desires to establish cordial relations with the US but is being held back by Washington. Putin is setting a tough tone for the ties as presidents of both states are set to meet in Geneva on 16th of June. The meeting is happening amid the US-Russian bilateral relations are greatly strained. Bilateral issues including jailing Kremlin critics, Ukraine, hacking allegations and many more that add fuel to the already tense ties. Now, China and Russia have pledged to work towards shared interests. In a phone call, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Russia's Sergei Lavrov vowed to protect world peace. Wang said the strategic partnership between China and Russia has stood the test of time. Whereas Lavrov said Russia supports efforts to synergize the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative. He said the activities held to mark 20 years of the Russia-China Treaty of Good Neighborliness will strengthen the friendship. The two sides also decided to expand economic and technical cooperations in pandemic prevention. Moving on now, the US says the closure of the final aid crossing into Syria could cause senseless cruelty for millions of Syrians. The US envoy to the UN called on the Security Council to extend permission for cross-border aid delivery. Linda Thompson-Greenfield said Syrians will die without the Bab al-Hawa crossing, the only remaining access point. She said Washington wants the UN to feed starving children, protect homeless families and vaccinate locals. The envoy revealed plans to meet her Russian counterpart and other Security Council members to press for the extended access. Now in Mali, thousands of supporters of the opposition coalition gathered for a rally in Bamako's Independence Square. They marked 1 year since the start of protests that led to the ouster of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. The long-planned rally was held after coup leader Colonel Assimi Goïta ousted the interim leaders on 24th of May. But the coalition felt slighted after it wasn't consulted and publicly condemned Goïta's seizure of power. Goïta is expected to name opposition leader Choguel Maïga as Prime Minister, who spearheaded the protests last year. Meanwhile, the World Bank says it will pause payments to operations in Mali after the military seized power. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called on the Catholic Church to take responsibility for its role in the country's residential schools. His statement comes after the recent discovery of the remains of 215 children at a former school for the Indigenous children. Trudeau said that as a Catholic, he is deeply disappointed by the position taken by the Church. He urged the latter to release its records on the schools. Meanwhile, the National Assembly of Bishops in Canada has said the Catholic Church as a whole was not associated with the residential schools. Between 1831 and 1996, some 150,000 children were forcibly sent to residential schools, where many suffered abuse and even death. The Vice President of Namibia has called out on Germany's offer to pay 1.1 billion euros as reparations to the colonial-era genocide. Nangolo Mbumba said that no amount in any currency can truly compensate for the loss of human life. In a statement, Mbumba said the amount does not address the quantum of reparations initially submitted to the German government. He added the money cannot pay off Namibians being expelled and killed from their own state. Earlier in a deal with Namibia, Germany agreed to fund infrastructure projects in the country as a compensation. Germany apologized for its role in the slaughter of Herero and Nama tribes people in Namibia more than a century ago. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. The United States says it views the current ransomware attacks as a rising threat and concern to the country's national security. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said U.S. President Joe Biden wishes to raise the concern with his Russian counterpart in Geneva. Psaki added that some of the ransomware hackers were traced back to being of Russian origin. Earlier, Russia's President Vladimir Putin said the U.S. was trying to hold back the developments made by Moscow for the betterment of bilateral ties. Speaking at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin said Russia desires to establish cordial relations with the U.S. but is being held back by Washington. Putin is setting a tough tone for the ties as presidents of both states are set to meet in Geneva on 16th of June. Now, 2 people have been killed while 6 are missing in an accident in a coal mine in China's central Henan province. State media said the accidental outburst occurred at a mine run by Henan Heavy Coal and Electricity Company. It said authorities in Henan province have launched an emergency response plan. Henan's provincial government approved the reopening of a mine operated by Hebei last month after it was shut for not complying with the regulations. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized Facebook's decision to ban him for 2 years, calling it an insult to his voters. In a statement, Trump called the 2020 presidential election rigged and that he sees himself making a return to the White House. Earlier, the social media company suspended his Facebook and Instagram accounts for 2 years. This came after Trump posted about the U.S. Capitol riots, which Facebook termed a severe violation of its rules. The company also announced it might reinstate the accounts in January 2023 after re-evaluating its risk to public safety. Now, in Myanmar, villagers helped 4 stuck wild elephants out of a mud pit by digging them an escape route. Footage shows the elephants trying to climb the steep slope on the side of the pit and make it out. The villagers in the western Rakhine state usually avoid the elephants in the forest, but they feared the animals would have died if they had stayed trapped in the hole. A rescuer said they saved the elephants because they are at risk of vanishing and part of their state's heritage. However, it was unclear how the animals fell into the pit. Threats and attacks against Afghan journalists have sharply increased since talks between the Taliban and Kabul began. This poses a threat to freedom of speech in any peace settlement. Details in this report.
Scared of what may happen to her, one of Afghanistan's most high-profile reporter, Anisa Shahid, takes a different route to work each day. There is a series of iron, concrete and sand blast walls to navigate along with multiple security checkpoints to her workplace. Her colleagues have stacked up helmets and bulletproof vests in case they come under attack.
It's like playing with fire when you leave the office. When I leave, well, I say goodbye. I have no idea if I will return or not. Each moment, I expect any incident could definitely happen in front of me. It became very normal.
International press rights organization Reporters Without Borders has listed Anisa as one of the 30 information heroes during the pandemic. Anisa says the main concern among journalists remain what a Taliban peace agreement might look like.
Especially for women and women journalists, because we have no idea what will happen with media, freedom of speech, and women's presence in the media once there's a deal with the Taliban, if power is shared with them.
She says 138 journalists have been killed in the violence over the past years, but no one knows who is behind these attacks.
Now, the UK, France and Germany say the group of 7 is within touching distance of a historic tax deal. Talks are underway in Britain to close the net on charge large companies such as Google, Amazon and Facebook, which do not pay their fair share of tax. Meanwhile, France Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said the G7 is just 1 millimetre away from an agreement. In an interview, German Finance Minister Olaf Scholz said he is confident an agreement will be reached before the meeting ends on Saturday. But major disagreements remain, including the minimum rate at which companies should be taxed. Meanwhile, oil prices have surged record high, with Brent topping $72 a barrel for the first time since 2019. This comes as OPEC Plus supply discipline and recovering demand countered concerns about patchy COVID-19 vaccination rollout around the globe. Earlier this week, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries said they would stick to agreed supply restraint. While a weekly supply report showed U.S. crude inventories dropped more than expected last week. A slowdown in talks over Iran's nuclear program, which reduced expectations of a return of uranium oil supply, also boosted oil. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. With the weather update, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest update, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.